Hello everyone, my name is Alana. My story is like a fairy tale. I don't believe it happened, but roughly speaking, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I had $1 million. Can you imagine my reaction and feelings? Now I'll tell you more about how it happened, while you watch and listen carefully. I have a normal family, a father, a mother, and 2 sisters. We always lived well, were provided for, and my father worked in a family business, which was started by my grandmother, B. She is the founder of a cleaning company in our city. My father, after graduating from college, decided to help her temporarily, but he remained in this job. In principle, it suited him, as well as my grandmother, because the family business had to be continued by someone. Unlike everyone else, I loved my grandmother the most, because I grew up with her while my father was busy at work and my mother was with other girls. My grandmother was very cheerful. She loved to prank my father. I remember once she made me call him and tell him that my grandmother had fallen. Before that, she spilled ketchup on the floor, made a small mess in the kitchen, and put glasses next to it for the real picture. By the way, Granny never took them off, even in her sleep. So I called him with a trembling voice, but he was shaking more from laughter than from panic. My father came running, and I took his face on camera. He was so panicked. He was running around, yelling, not knowing what to do. And then Grandma abruptly got up from the floor covered in ketchup and started laughing. Dad had a fight with her and left, and we watched the video for a long time. In general, Grandma B and I became the best team. I often stayed over at her house. We chatted before going to bed all the time, and it was our ritual. My granddaughter, when I'm gone, you'll have to work in my business. Your father makes good money, but you're smarter than your father. Come on, Grandma, I know you're still going to live for a long time. You're supposed to come to my wedding, remember? I remember, but I still don't ever want you to want for anything. As long as I have you, I have everything I need. I know, baby, I know. She often repeated these words because she loved me more than anyone else. We had a special bond, and no one could understand it. The next day, I had to go back to my parents' house. My grandmother and I decided to go to the mall to get a new dress for me. Suddenly, my father called, saying that he would be there soon, and my grandmother and I decided to hurry up. I took the bags and ran towards the back door. B shouted at me, "Careful, take your time!" But I had already put my foot on the first step, and somehow I stepped wrongly, and as a result, I began to fall upside down. And then I vaguely remember what people around said. Grandma shouted to call an ambulance. I remember how much my head hurt, and then there was just emptiness. Everything was like a dream, as if I was very asleep, but sometimes I heard voices. It was Granny who spoke. Alana, I hope you can hear me. My girl, please wake up. I can't stand this. If I hadn't gone to the mall with you, nothing would have happened. I'm a bad grandmother. I'm sorry, honey. Please wake up. At that moment, I wanted so much to answer her. Like, Grandma, are you okay? I'm just sleeping. I'm fine. But I couldn't move. My body became so light and airy that I could hardly feel it. B was crying a lot. They tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop crying. I felt sorry for her, but I couldn't do anything about it either. And then I heard my father and mother talking next to each other. It's all your fault. I told you not to let her stay with her grandmother for more than a few days, but you were against it. So now it's all my fault? You didn't have enough time for her, so she lived with my mother all the time, while she herself has a mother. How dare you! You've been missing at work for days, and I've got 2 other little kids. Of course, it was very hard for you. What's it like for me to earn all the money? To support you? What? Please calm down. Your daughter needs peace. Even though she's in a coma, she can hear everything. She needs positive emotions around her. What did they say? A coma? Am I in a coma? How? At this time, I began to panic. I wanted to get up, ask, look at my parents, but I could not move. At that moment, I heard something like sensors. It must mean that I was in a hospital. And then someone came in and gave me an injection, so I must have fallen asleep inside again. Over time, I stopped hearing my grandmother's voice next to me, and it made me sad. I looked for her, but no one understood. My father and mother almost always cried next to my bed, and then silence again. Then one day, Bee came to me in a dream. "My girl, I've missed you so much." "Granny, how nice to see you! But what are you doing here?" "I think I'm in a coma, or am I?" "That's right, my dear, that's right. I came to say goodbye to you." "In what way?" "You can say that when you wake up, we won't see each other. So I came to you while there was still some time. I love you, and I will always love you, and I will still. I will watch over you, help, and protect you." "Granny, I don't quite understand." "It's been 10 years since you've been asleep. It's time to wake up. You have things to do. Remember that I'm always there for you." "What do you mean, Granny? What's happening?" At this point, my grandmother began to move away, and I shouted, "Granny, where are you going? Wait for me, I'm with you." And she just said to me, "It's too early for you." At that moment, I opened my eyes and started coughing. I came to and saw my mother next to me. She had aged so much. My mother screamed, cried, hugged me, and then told me that 10 years had passed since I fell into a coma. I went through a couple of days of examinations, tests. I was waiting for a long rehabilitation ahead when I more or less came to my senses and started a conversation with my parents. "Dad, Mom, where is Grandma? Why isn't she around?" "You know, honey, Grandma, she's gone." "How? She was talking to me in my sleep." "She was very worried about you. Her heart broke." A lump rose in my throat, and I felt so bad that I began to cry. A few days later, I visited her grave, talked to her, said goodbye, and couldn't believe it was the last time I would see her. But that wasn't all. Later, her lawyer came to us. He read her will, and it turned out that she had left me $1 million, plus her house and cars. Anyway, she left everything she had for me. Like she knew I'd wake up. I thanked her for such a gift, and she also gave me a letter. It said she was taking back what she'd said about the job. She wanted me not to continue her business if I didn't want to, but to do what I loved so that I could be happy, because life is too short. A month later, I approached my father, writing a plan about what I needed to do next. "Dad, I would like to open my own business." "What's the deal?" "I want to open a crisis center for those in trouble." "But this is a very serious center. It needs a lot of documents. Besides, you didn't go to college." "But I was in a coma. I know what it's like. I lost 10 years, so I will study at the same time. We will register the company under you, but I will lead it and I will learn." "Are you sure?" "I lost 10 years. I have no time to be sure of something. It's time to act." A lot of work was done. It took more than a year, but everything turned out well. My father and I made an office out of my grandmother's house. I invested my money there and started learning to work and go to college. I had a hard time. It was a big load. But I'm glad that I did not spend the money just like that, but invested it in what my soul lies in. What would you have done if you were me?
Hi everyone, my name is Duke. Just recently, I literally back from the dead. No one expected or believed, except for one person. Now I'll tell you who it is and how it all happened. I hope you enjoy my story, but first, I'm waiting for your likes, comments under the video at the end of viewing, and please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. I grew up in a rich family. I had everything that my age guys can only dream of. I got my first car worth an apartment, and that's not all. Yes, my parents are fabulously rich. They have several businesses, and they have 2 kids who are like me. Besides me, by the way, there is a daughter. My sister's name is Dakey. Do you want to know what it is? In short, she's a bitch. Dakey also loved not only expensive things, but also people. In short, she did not communicate with poor people. She was not the kind of friend who would comfort you when you were in a bad way, or help you in a difficult moment. She did not show her emotions to anyone, but she did not perceive other people's emotions either. As for me, I was a little bit different. Yes, I was like a kinder side, more understanding, although I was also considered a star, and brash, and a bully. At least my friends liked me better, I knew that, than my friends' girlfriends. Our parents are very busy people. They are almost never in our mansion. Fortunately, we have a lot of servants and we do not do any chores around the house at all. Our mother owned a whole chain of luxury clothing stores and she constantly flew somewhere to bring clothes from abroad. My mother wasn't very sentimental either, but my sister took after her, and I, as you may have guessed, look more like my father. Funny and interesting, but the men in our house have a bigger heart than the women's have. When I was a child, someone hurt my sister or me. We ran to my mother to complain, and I got even more from her for allowing such an attitude to myself, and another slap for not being able to solve the problem on my own. It was pretty cruel, but we quickly learned not to tell her anything else, not to complain, and generally to pretend that nothing was happening. But with Dad, it was completely different. Dad felt sorry for us, he kissed Dakey, and hugged me. Dad knew how to choose the right words and support in a real, fatherly way. In general, we had enough love, so we grew up until we were all grown up. So, one day, I came home drunk enough, I just felt bad. To be honest, I could barely stand on my feet and miraculously got home by car. As soon as I fell into the room and lay down on the bed, my sister called me. For some reason, she was crying and asking for help. I immediately seemed to sober up. I was afraid for her. She asked me to come, and of course, I left immediately. I don't remember exactly how fast I was going, but I was going fast. I remember how I almost got there, how I picked up the phone to check the address with the neighbors. As soon as I unlocked my phone, I saw that some guys and Dakey were standing by the road. She was crying. Out of anger, I wanted to run over them. I drove even more, and lost control. The car overturned and crashed into a tree. I remember opening my eyes, hearing my sister's voice calling for help, and then I had a dream. I dreamed a lot of things, including the moment of the accident. I was trying to avenge my sister. Dakey was crying all the time. I could clearly hear her voice in my sleep. She was asking for forgiveness, and it was so sad. I heard my father's voice, my friend's voice, and then I heard my mother come to me. I also thought that the pancake is going to hit me even more. And the most amazing thing is that I heard her crying. Can you imagine how surprised I was when I first heard her cry? I was used to the fact that my mother's reputation as an iron lady, and it was like this at work, stone as a rock. I heard it many times, and then thought I heard strange voices. I didn't know them. I didn't really understand the speech of strangers, but I still had a dream. It was so long. And then one day, when I'd had a good sleep, I heard my mother crying again, and she was crying as hard as she'd ever cried before. She asked me to come home. I was surprised, because did I sleep somewhere outside the house? I opened my eyes, saw a bright light, and my eyes hurt. I wanted to ask them to close the windows, but I suddenly realized that I couldn't speak because I had something in my mouth. I took a deep breath through my nose and started coughing. At this moment, my mother screamed like a madman. She flew up to me and started shouting my name. Then she ran around the room and shouted someone's last name. Immediately a man came running. He pulled all the excess out of my mouth, believed the vital signs, shone flashlights in my eyes, felt my hands, and asked me to tell my name. I answered all the questions and then asked what was going on. My mother came up to me again and I saw a very old woman instead. Her hair was almost gray, bags under her eyes. She had lost so much weight. I said, "Mom," and she rushed back to me. She was crying and happy, and I couldn't understand what was going on. Finally, after some time, a stranger came up to me again, and he told me that I had an accident while driving for my sister. I lost control of the car and it rolled over. I ended up with a head injury and went into a coma. "You were in a coma for 10 years, the doctor said. The words hit me like an arrow, and I was scared and panicked. I was in a coma? Why 10 years? Have I lost so much time? I asked myself. I was released from the hospital not immediately, only a week later. The news about me spread around the city, but my mother decided not to accept anyone from the guests yet. I saw my father. My sister begged for forgiveness. As it turned out, I had not dreamed it before. I heard it all. I calmed her down because I really didn't hold a grudge against her. A couple of days later, we went out for a walk and talked about a lot. I noticed that it wasn't just my mother who had changed. Dakey also became more human and sentimental. She told me that on the day I woke up, the doctors had already suggested that my mother turn off the machine that I was using to breathe, because I couldn't do it on my own. Parents' permission was required. My father was ready to sign the paper because he couldn't torment me anymore, but my mother, she didn't agree. She believed in me and shouted that even if I lay in this state for another 30 years, she would agree. Just then, I opened my eyes. You know, it was a real miracle. There are probably 1 in a million cases like me. Despite the fact that I missed so much in life, I now have the opportunity to make up for everything. Plus, the whole situation is that I got to know my mother and sister from the other side, and my mother's love and faith in me did not allow me to die. And this is magical.